When most people hear the word light, they picture brightness, color, or speed. Something quick, weightless, and unlike ordinary objects. That intuition isn't wrong, but it misses what light actually represents in physics. Light is not treated as a physical substance traveling through space. It is treated as a method by which energy moves. Once you accept that, light stops being mysterious and starts following the same bookkeeping rules as everything else. The first key fact is simple. Light has no rest mass, but it does possess energy and momentum. Together, those two properties explain nearly all of its strange behavior. Momentum is usually associated with heavy things, cars, balls, planets. But in physics, momentum comes from energy in motion, not just from mass. Light moves at the maximum speed nature allows, and because it moves, its energy necessarily carries momentum. When light strikes a surface and reflects, the surface feels a force. It is tiny, but it is real. We can measure it. Engineers account for it. Spacecraft designs include it. Something without mass can still push. That already tells us something important about what mass really is. Mass is not simply the amount of stuff something contains. In physics, mass measures how strongly an object resists acceleration and how strongly it interacts with gravity. Light cannot speed up or slow down, so resistance to acceleration doesn't apply to it in the usual sense. But gravity still affects light. Light curves when it passes near massive objects. Stars and galaxies bend its path. This happens not because light secretly has mass, but because gravity is not merely a force pulling on mass. Gravity describes the geometry of space and time, and anything that moves through space and time follows that geometry. Light included. This leads to a deeper link. Mass and light are not opposites. They are two expressions of energy. Mass is energy arranged in a form that can remain at rest. Light is energy that cannot stop moving. When matter emits light, it loses a minute amount of mass. When matter absorbs light, it gains a minute amount of mass. This is not symbolic language. It is a precise effect predicted by theory and confirmed by experiment. The changes are usually too small to notice, but the exchange is exact. Seen this way, light becomes easier to understand. It is energy moving freely, with no option to pause. And mass becomes energy organized in a form that can stay in place. Both obey the same laws. They differ not in essence, but in how that energy is permitted to behave. Accepting that mass and light are both forms of energy naturally leads to a more basic question. What is light itself? At the most fundamental level, people often imagine light as something that travels from one place to another, like an invisible stream. That picture works well enough to use a flashlight or turn on a lamp, but physics requires something more precise. In physics, light is not defined by brightness or color. Those are sensations produced by our eyes. Light is defined as a disturbance in the electromagnetic field that carries energy and momentum through space. That may sound abstract, so it helps to use an analogy. Think of a lake. Drop a stone into the water, and nothing material moves from the splash to the shore. The water itself mostly stays put. What travels outward is the disturbance, the changing height of the surface. Light behaves in a similar way, except the surface is the electromagnetic field, and the disturbance moves through space. In physics, space is filled with electromagnetic fields. These fields are not made of matter. They are properties assigned to every location. Just as temperature can have a value at every point in a room, electric and magnetic fields have values at every point in space. Light appears when these field values change over time in a linked manner. A changing electric field generates a magnetic field. A changing magnetic field generates an electric field. These changes sustain each other and move forward. That moving pattern is light. Nothing physical is being carried along like a thrown object. What travels is the change itself. This already pushes against common sense. Everyday experience teaches us that motion involves objects. Light forces physics to deal with motion without matter being transported. That is why light does not need a medium. Sound requires air, because sound is motion of air molecules. Light is motion of fields, and the fields are already present everywhere. At this point, intuition usually objects and says, "Fine, but light still feels like a particle." That instinct is not wrong, but it needs refinement. Light is often described in terms of photons. A photon is not a tiny glowing pellet flying through space. A photon is the smallest unit of electromagnetic energy that can be exchanged. It becomes relevant when light interacts with matter. A famous experiment makes this unavoidable: the photoelectric effect. When light shines on a metal surface, electrons can be knocked out. Classical thinking predicts that brighter light should eject electrons more easily, regardless of color. That prediction fails. Experiments show that if the light's frequency is too low, no electrons are emitted at all, no matter how intense the light is. Increase the frequency past a certain threshold, and electrons appear instantly, even at low brightness. This only makes sense if light transfers energy in discrete packets. Each photon carries a specific amount of energy set by its frequency. If that energy is too small, no amount of piling photons together will help. Common sense expects gradual buildup. Nature does not allow it here. This experiment forces a conclusion. Light behaves as packets of energy during interaction, but light also spreads, bends, and interferes. Behaviors associated with waves. The same phenomenon shows wave behavior while traveling and particle behavior while exchanging energy. That is not a contradiction. It is a limit of everyday categories. At a deeper level, light is described as a quantized excitation of the electromagnetic field. The field can change only by certain allowed amounts. Light corresponds to those allowed changes moving through space. Now mass enters again. Mass appears when energy becomes locked into arrangements that can persist. Electrons bound to nuclei, fields tied together, motion constrained. That trapped energy behaves as mass. Light represents energy that is not trapped. This explains why light has no rest mass. Rest mass is defined as energy present when an object is not moving. Light cannot meet that condition. There is no frame of reference in which light is at rest. The idea simply does not apply. Because of that, light always travels at the same speed. Not because it is pushed, and not because it chooses to, but because the equations governing electromagnetic fields allow only one speed for self-sustaining: disturbances. That speed is built into space and time themselves. This challenges another intuition. Speed usually depends on how hard something is thrown. Light ignores that rule. This is also why light defines the maximum possible speed. Objects with mass must be able to slow down or stop. Light cannot. That difference separates matter from radiation. Color now fits naturally into this picture. Color corresponds to the frequency of the electromagnetic oscillation. Higher frequency means more energy per photon. Lower frequency means less energy per photon. The energy of light is tied directly to how quickly the field changes. This explains why ultraviolet light can damage cells while radio waves cannot, even if radio waves deliver more total energy. Each ultraviolet photon carries enough energy to alter chemical bonds. Radio photons do not. Common sense expects total power to matter most. Physics shows that how energy is packaged matters just as much. Another famous example reinforces this. Gravitational lensing. Light bends as it passes near massive objects. Not because light has mass, but because gravity shapes space and time. Light follows that shape because it always follows the geometry of space-time. Photographs of distant galaxies distorted by gravity confirm this directly. Light responds to gravity even without mass. That forces physics to abandon the idea that gravity is simply a pull between masses. It is something deeper. Light can push because momentum accompanies energy in motion. Light bends because space-time guides all energy. Light carries information because fields can change in organized patterns. Light heats objects because transferring energy changes atomic motion. No special rules are needed for light. It follows the same accounting as everything else. Light is energy in its most mobile form. It cannot remain still, cannot form stable structures, cannot pause. Mass is energy arranged in forms that can endure. Both come from the same underlying quantity and obey the same rules, behaving differently because the universe allows them to. Understanding light this way removes mystery without removing wonder. It becomes one of the clearest examples physics offers of how energy, mass, space, and time belong to a single connected system. At this point, light stops being merely something that lets us see and becomes a guide to how reality is organized. Because light does more than move energy. It sets limits. It defines connections. It tells space and time how they are permitted to behave. One of the most surprising consequences is this. Light determines what can influence what. In everyday thinking, cause and effect feels straightforward. Something happens, then something else responds. Distance just means delay. Farther away means later. That intuition works well for walking across a room or throwing a ball. Light reveals where that intuition fails. Nothing that carries energy or information can act faster than light. Not because light is special in a sentimental sense, but because it represents the fastest way any physical influence can move through space and time. Light draws the boundary between what can be causally connected and what cannot. This has a concrete meaning. One event can affect another only if light has time to travel between them. If it cannot, then no physical signal, no force, no message can bridge that gap. This limit is not about technology. It is built into how electromagnetic fields and space-time behave. That boundary shapes the structure of time itself. Events are not ordered simply by before and after in an absolute way. For distant events, the order can depend on motion. What remains fixed is causality, whether one event can influence another. Light sets that rule. This is why light sits at the center of relativity without being added as an extra idea. Relativity does not say light is special, so everything must obey it. It says the structure of space and time is such that light emerges as the universal speed that everything agrees on. Common sense expects space and time to exist first, with light moving inside them. Physics finds the reverse. Light reveals how space and time are woven together. Another implication follows directly. Because light carries energy and momentum but has no rest mass, it shows that mass is not the fundamental currency of physics. Energy is. Mass is one form energy can take. Light is another. This relationship is captured exactly in the link between mass and energy. When matter emits light, its mass decreases. When matter absorbs light, its mass increases. This is not analogy. It is a measured fact. Nuclear reactions make it obvious on large scales. But the same exchange happens whenever light is involved, even in ordinary situations. This forces a revision of what substance means. Objects feel solid, permanent, self-contained. Light feels fleeting. Physics shows both are arrangements of the same underlying quantity. The difference is not what they are made of, but how long the arrangement can last. This leads to a result that seems strange at first. Empty space filled with light has inertia. A box filled with light weighs more than the same box without it. The difference is tiny, but it exists. Energy contributes to gravity whether it appears as mass or radiation. That is not intuitive. Common sense expects weight to come from matter. Light refuses to follow that expectation. Another deep consequence appears when information enters the picture. Light is the primary way information moves through the universe. Every image, every signal, every measurement depends on light or electromagnetic radiation. That is not coincidence. It follows from the fact that electromagnetic fields can change in structured ways and carry those changes across space. This means information is physical. It is not abstract. It has energy costs. Sending a message requires energy. Detecting a signal requires energy. Even learning, something leaves physical traces. Light ties information to energy in a way that cannot be separated. This connection also explains why observation matters so much in physics. To observe is to exchange energy and information. Light is almost always involved. Observation is not passive. It is an interaction governed by the same laws as everything else. This removes a common misunderstanding. Physics does not say, reality depends on human awareness. It says reality depends on physical interaction. Light makes those interactions possible across distance. There is also a deeper unity here. Light follows quantum rules when exchanging energy. It follows relativistic rules when moving through space-time. It follows classical rules when huge numbers of photons act together. The same entity connects three major frameworks of physics without changing identity. That alone is remarkable. Many ideas in physics belong to one domain or another. Light refuses to stay confined. It forces theories to agree or be rejected. Any serious description of nature must handle light correctly. If a theory mishandles light, something is wrong. Finally, there is a conceptual implication that is easy to overlook. Light shows that the universe is not built from objects alone. It is built from relationships, constraints, and permitted motions. Light is not so much a thing moving through space as a way space and time allow energy to move. That changes what existence means in physics. To exist is not only to occupy space, it is to participate in the rules that govern change. Light participates fully. It carries energy, momentum, information, and influence. It links distant regions while obeying strict limits. It reveals that those limits are not obstacles, but the structure itself. Seen this way, light is not mysterious. It is honest. It tells us how far causes can reach, how energy can travel, and how space and time cooperate to make events possible at all. Understanding light deeply is less about collecting facts and more about accepting that the universe is organized by rules that feel unfamiliar yet remain consistent everywhere. So after all of this, it is worth asking what picture of the world remains when the details settle. Light in physics is not an exception. It is a reference point. It shows how energy behaves when it is free to move, how space and time respond, and how limits arise naturally from the structure of the laws themselves. What we know with confidence is this: light is an excitation of the electromagnetic field. It carries energy and momentum. It always moves at the same speed because the equations describing the field allow no alternative. It has no rest mass, yet it responds to gravity because gravity governs space-time, not just matter. It transfers energy in discrete units during interaction, explaining experiments classical intuition could not. These statements are not speculative. They are supported by measurement, technology, and repeated observation. We also know that mass and light are not separate substances. They are different behaviors of energy. Mass corresponds to energy arranged in forms that can persist. Light corresponds to energy that cannot be held still. Both contribute to gravity. Both obey conservation laws. Both belong to the same accounting system. From this, a coherent worldview appears. The universe is not primarily built from objects. It is built from fields, energy, and constraints on how change is allowed. Objects appear when energy organizes in lasting ways. Light appears when energy moves freely through fields. Space and time are not passive backgrounds, but active parts of the system that determine how motion and influence are permitted. This perspective clears up several misunderstandings. Light does not travel through nothing. It propagates through fields already present everywhere. Light does not behave strangely. It behaves consistently under rules that differ from everyday experience. Light does not blur physics. It demands precision. It also highlights what we do not yet know. We do not know why the electromagnetic field exists in its current form. We do not know why the constants that fix the speed of light have the values they do. We do not yet have a complete theory that unifies light's quantum behavior with gravity at the smallest scales. These are open areas of research, not settled questions. But the gaps are bounded. They do not undermine what has already been established. Any deeper theory must still reproduce the behavior of light exactly as observed. The rules light follows are not optional. They are constraints any explanation must satisfy. That distinction matters.